next presenter will be addressing the question, should the British monarchy be abolished? Please join me in welcoming to the podium Magdalena Spengler.
States, there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. This biblical message of equality stands in sharp contrast to the British monarchy, an institution based on birthright, hierarchy, and inherited privilege. While the United Kingdom claims to uphold values of fairness and equal rights, it maintains a system that goes completely against its principles. This leads to the question, should the monarchy be abolished? I argue that the British monarchy should be abolished because it contradicts the principles of democracy and equality, imposes an unjust financial burden on taxpayers, and is repeatedly involved in scandalous behavior. Tonight, I will provide some background information, explain my points, and talk about a common misconception. According to the royal household, the British monarchy is the oldest form of government in the United Kingdom. When the Roman Empire left Britain, various other kingdoms moved throughout the island. Soon, the strongest kings expanded their domains. Thus, William invaded England in 1066, establishing an absolute monarchy. Over time, a parliament began to develop in the 13th century. When Elizabeth I died in 1603, James VI of Scotland became the king and unified England and Scotland into Great Britain. Before Wales was united, the kingdom was law in 1563, and North Ireland invaded in 1801. Later in 1714, the House of Hanover ruled England, followed by the Windsors in 1901, who was the ruling family till today. Now, Charles III, the first child of Queen Elizabeth II, who was on the throne from 1952 to 2022, is the current British monarch. The core of the family is King Charles, his wife Queen Camilla, his 3 siblings, his 2 children, and their wives, as well as 5 grandchildren. Nowadays, the United Kingdom calls itself a democratic constitutional monarchy. This means that the king rules according to a constitution and established set of rules, which limits his power. Furthermore, the monarch inherits the office from his parents and usually holds it until he dies. Some of the powers the monarch has are appointing and removing ministers and members of the House of Lords, dissolving parliament to bring about general elections, disbanding it for a set period of time, and approving laws. He also carries out diplomacy and agrees on treaties, where he's the head of the armed forces and the Church of England. In addition, the king leads monthly meetings with the Privy Council, which function is to advise the king on giving formal effect to proclamations and orders in council, and he speaks with the Prime Minister every week. Furthermore, the king is head of state in 14 countries beyond the UK and the head of Commonwealth, a voluntary association of 56 countries. As Sebastian Shaddy, writer for the New Statesman, puts it, 115,000 hectares of agricultural land and forests, retail properties, the Tower Bridge, most of Regent Street, about 55% of UK foreshore, such as royal residences, plus another 6 palaces, 7 castles, 12 homes, 56 cottages, and 14 ancient ruins belong to the Crown Estate. In 2023, the public spent about £100 million on King Charles' coronation. In the same year, the UK had the worst GDP performance since the 2008 financial crisis. This suggests that it might have been more beneficial to spend an enormous amount of tax money on society itself by supporting individuals and families. Yet, this is not the only financial burden that taxpayers have to carry. In fact, 1,133 people who are paid out of the public purse work for the monarch. According to the royal household, £44 million are spent yearly on salary, wages, and other household costs. First, it can be argued that the monarch does not need this many people working for him, including several carpet planners, cooks, his own furniture conservator, and a curtain maker. Second, it is questionable whether the taxpayer should pick up the cost, especially since both King Charles and his son William get paid a yearly salary of £22 million. In addition to this, the organization Republic has estimated the total annual cost of the monarchy to be £345 million, which is twice as much as any other monarchy in Europe. If you take a closer look at the huge number, We see that most of the money is spent on the royal family's own travel, accommodation, and excessive security arrangements. As I mentioned earlier, King Charles III and his son Prince William are each paid £22 million a year, which is roughly 6 times the total combined salary of all democratic heads of state in Europe. Provided that, one might think that the royals would have a difficult and time-consuming job. However, if you have a closer look at their occupation, you recognize that this is not the case. In fact, at no point do the two royals work a full week or even a full day. In 2024, Charles had 372 engagements. What might sound like a big number at first reveals itself to a very late schedule. Namely, if you take into consideration the average length of an engagement, which is 1 hour, we realize that the number adds up to only 45 birthdays a year. As Edgar Wilson in the myth of the British monarchy states, the royal family have plenty of time on their hands. 30-odd public appearances in 90 days is hardly a back-breaking program for a company whose principle is the making of public appearances. Even King Charles, former press officer, confirmed that the royals barely work when he's sad. The Windsors are very good at working 3 days a week, 5 days a month of the year, and making it look as if they work hard. This shows us that the royal house is responsible for spending way much more needed tax money, which could be used for other purposes than necessary. As Karl Alvenschen stated, peace cannot exist without justice. Justice cannot exist without fairness. Fairness cannot exist without the development. Development cannot exist without democracy. Democracy cannot exist without respect for the identity and worth of cultures and people. This quote is reflected by Switzerland, a truly direct democratic country where most of the decisions are made directly by the citizens. This results in no foreign wars, low taxes, an extremely high minimum wage, respect for the 4 official languages, very low unemployment and interest rates, and a favorable environment for development. Therefore, the facts show that this form of government is one of the best in the world today and should be introduced in Britain as well. Whenever a provision of a bill or an amendment to a bill would significantly affect the interests of the crown consent of the monarch is required. Hence, about 1,000 laws were vetted by Queen Elizabeth II and her son King Charles III before they were approved by the members of the British Parliament. Even though this procedure might not sound undemocratic at first, there come bigger problems along with it. First, it's questionable why some of the bills, such as a 1963 bill relating to the British Museum, a 1986 bill on Salmon, and a 2019 parking bill were subjected to Queen's consent. Even though they might be somehow related to the interests of the crown, they should not need the monarch's approval since they're for the benefit of society. Second, according to an investigation of The Guardian, documents from the National Archives revealed that the Queen has occasionally used a procedure to influence legislation. For instance, she was able to convince ministers to change laws that appear to affect her estates and private law. This is a clear example of undemocratic behavior, since the monarch was using the law for her own personal gain. On top of that, personalized exemptions for the Queen had been written into more than 160 laws to grant immunity as a private landowner and business owner. For instance, the police are not allowed to enter the private Balmoral and Sandringham estates, such as the Queen's fishing business, to investigate suspected crimes including wildlife offenses and environmental pollution without the monarch's permission. Even more concerning is the exemption from the Equality Act of 2010, which legally protects people from discrimination in the workplace and in wider society. In addition, the monarch does not have to pay any taxes, including income or capital gains tax. These are only a few from the many exemptions that show us that not everyone is equal before the law in the United Kingdom. It is not unusual to read about the latest rumors and events of the royal family in magazines and newspapers. In fact, there are millions of publications such as articles, videos, and social media posts about a British family which quite often like to show the dark side of the royal house. Since Harry and Meghan announced that they plan to step back as senior working royals in 2020, the couple began speaking about their step back publicly. First, Meghan told Oprah Winfrey in an interview that there were concerns and conversations about how dark their son's skin might be when he's born. She also mentioned that he was not going to receive security or title. The following harsh accusations that the royals were racist casted a dark shadow on the royal family. Furthermore, according to Prince Harry, content of private letters between him and his father had been intentionally leaked to news magazines. When Prince Harry was invited to a birthday party in 2005, he wore the desert uniform of General Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps. In other words, a Nazi costume. On his sleeve was a clearly visible swastika, the sign of a government that killed millions of innocent people, including Jews. Even more concerning is the relationship between Jeffrey Epstein, a child sex offender, and Queen Elizabeth's son. According to Jane Doe, she, who was only 17 at that time, and other underage girls were forced to have sexual relations with the prince. Even a picture of Andrew hugging one of the girls was published. It is important to address that public figures of a government, in this case the royal family, should not serve for entertainment, but follow their responsibilities. However, this is not the current case in the United Kingdom, as we can see on published private letters, the docuseries, and interviews from the members. This can not only harm the reputation of the royal members, but also portrays the British government as a ridiculous institution. Instead of focusing on real problems and maintaining peace, they raise more irritations and issues. Their life should not be a playground where members accuse each other publicly and earn money while doing so. Furthermore, there is evidence for brutal crimes committed by members of the royal family, such as participation in racism and child trafficking. Thus, many of the members who have big responsibilities and certain expectations to fulfill should not have this much influence in politics and the representation of the country. Probably the most discussed argument for the monarchy is the revenue generated from tourism. According to Debbie Green, about 3 million people visited official residences in 2019, generating approximately £50 million. In fact, research by Visit Britain found that most of the tourists are likely to visit places associated with the royal family. Royal events such as coronations, funerals, weddings, and jubilees attract people from all over the world. They even claim that the monarchy contributes £500 million, a big sum, annually in total tourism revenue. Hence, if the monarchy were abolished, a significant source of income would be lost. First, tourism should not inform crucial decisions about the British democracy and constitution. As Roy Hattersley stated, once the monarchy feels it necessary to justify its existence in pro-se terms, the argument for monarchy collapses. Moreover, the tourism contribution is simply a myth. In fact, there is no evidence that the abolition of the monarchy will lead to significant economic downturn. As previously mentioned, some claim that the British monarchy generates about £500 million annually directly and indirectly from overseas tourists. However, the anti-monarch republic has proven this claim to be an overestimation. And even if the figure was accurate, in the context of the UK's economy, it is almost nothing. When put into perspective, the amount is just 1.9% of UK's heritage tourism revenue, 0.3% of all tourism revenue, and only 0.01% of Britain's total economy. Additionally, it has been shown that tourists are primarily interested in the history and the monumentums of the country rather than the monarchy. For instance, none of the 10 most visited attractions in the UK in 2021 were royal sites. Indeed, the famous Buckingham Palace ranks just 67th according to the Association of Leading Visitors Attractions. Furthermore, the data reveal that royal weddings do not boost tourism. Instead, they seem to have a negative effect with a decrease of 8 to 15% in foreign visits. Therefore, the idea that the monarchy positively impacts tourism is misleading. In conclusion, the British monarchy imposes financial burden on taxpayers with unnecessary costs that could be better used for the public good. Beyond the economic concerns, the monarchy is involved in scandals including racism, abuse of power, and even child trafficking. Moreover, it contradicts democratic values which are essential for a fair society. Therefore, the monarchy should be abolished in order to move closer to the principle of equality taught in the Bible, that all people are equal and deserving of the same rights. As Graham Smith states, if you accept the monarchy, you must accept the moral compromise that comes with it, from its erosion of the principle of equality to the secret influence in our laws. But the good news is that we don't have to accept it. Thank you. I now stand for questions.
It's a fair job. That was excellent, really good. Here's my question. Did you do anything to compare the levels of militarism or the size of bureaucracies in governments claiming to be democracies versus governments claiming to be monarchies?
Thank you for your question. Could you reword that, please?
Yes. In other words, I guess my question is, there are these flaws that a monarchy would have. It could be militaristic. They could have a big expenditure for their staff. And my question is there anything that you found or saw that showed that governments that claim to be democracies are less militaristic or have smaller bureaucracies, smaller numbers of government employees than monarchies do?
Thank you for your question. So, in my essay, I compared Switzerland a little, and in Switzerland, we see that every citizen basically is allowed to own guns, which I don't think is the case in Britain. And also, I mentioned that about 1,000 people just work for the king, just the king. And they're the citizens have to pay the taxes in order to pay the people working for the monarch. And obviously in Switzerland, that is not the case. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Young.
Great job, Magda. I never really knew much about the arguments against the monarchy, so again, I learned a lot from your presentation. Thank you. During your presentation, I admit I did pull out my phone and did a little bit of research. I looked, what percentage of British citizens would be on your side that say they want to abolish the monarchy? And the little bit of data I got, it seems like it's actually a significant minority that want to abolish it, and around 60% said, yeah, we should keep it. It's something that's good for the country. So how would you respond to your average British citizen who says, I hear your argument, I still want it? Is it your place to say, yeah, but you don't understand, this is actually really, really harmful for the common good? Or hey, it's democracy, the people want it, I guess they can have it.
Thank you for your question. According to my research, only 35% of the young generation favors the British monarchy, but about 85% of the older generations favor it. And I think we shouldn't base the system based on popularity, since popularity always changes. Also, we see a decrease in popularity since Queen Elizabeth died, and people are not really in favor of King Charles being the head of state. Thank you.
Magdalena. Awesome. This is right up my alley. I love this because I was a British history. That was my major in college at Northwestern University. I was a history major, but British history was my concentration. So I love this stuff. I took Irish history, South African history, Indian history. Everybody that had been colonial, Victorian England. So anyhow, one of the interesting aspects of this is actually it does come from the feudal times, as you mentioned when you discussed this. 1066, the Battle of Hastings, William the Conqueror invades England and becomes a feudal society. And even to this day, that continues right now. So the King of England actually owns all of the London area, believe it or not. I mean, he is a feudal lord, basically. Now, he gets taxed on that, but he collects rents from all of these different lands that he owns, which is basically all of England. So when Lady Diana died, when they're divorced, Prince Charles actually considered selling some of the lands. They decided not to do that because it's their source of revenue. So with what you're talking about, would you think that King Charles, now not Prince Charles, but King Charles, should he be stripped of all of his lands and holdings in Buckingham Palace at the same time? Because that's really where the taxes are coming from to support these thousands of servants and and the money that they have is they are collecting rents from these lands that they own. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I don't think he should be, but I think he would have to, since the taxpayers will not, like if he would abolish the British monarchy, the taxpayers will not have to carry the cost anymore, and he himself would not be able to like pay for the hundreds of buildings and the maintaining of the land he has.
Good job, Magdalene.
All right, our next presenter will be addressing the question, what should the general border policy be to best address the problem of human trafficking? Please join me in welcoming Paul Bruno to the podium.
Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge that, in agreement with Dr. Graham, I wrote my paper researching the situation leading up to the time of, but not including, the current Trump administration. On January 1st, 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which abolished slavery for all individuals in the United States. This point in the history of our country is remembered as a pinnacle of what it means to be a country built on freedom and to have the opportunity to pursue happiness. Freedom, however, gives us free will, which lets us choose whether to do good or evil. Now, 160 years later, we find what is supposed to be unthinkable in the past to be a harsh reality for thousands of people across North America. Human trafficking, one of the world's most evil crimes, generates hundreds of billions of dollars a year, ruining the lives of thousands of children, teens, and adults across the country. Despite being pushed off as a rare issue, is one of America's biggest flaws, as we are identified as one of the worst countries globally for human trafficking. To combat this issue, we should first understand what human trafficking is. Human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or threat to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. Traffickers will use methods such as violence, manipulation, false promises of well-paying jobs, or making romantic relationships. Why is the United States such a big spot for human trafficking and smuggling? One of the reasons is because of our large border with Mexico and not having a stable foundation on its policies. Simply put, if we can have strict yet just laws on our border, we can achieve much lower trafficking rates through methods such as increasing border security agents, government funding to help support groups who fight against traffickers, and increase in DNA testing while crossing the border with minors. We can adjust our laws to help give our border a better foundation. Knowing the history of the United States-Mexico border, we can get a better understanding of how the border should operate to best help our problem with human trafficking. Even from America's earliest stages, we have had trouble along the border, and not only coming from the United States, but also from Mexico. From the beginning in 1830, Mexico bans immigration from the United States to rid its lands of English-speaking people. This move was aimed at limiting the population of English-speaking settlers who were ignoring Mexican laws. In 1836, the Republic of Texas declares independence from Mexico, leading to the establishment of a disputed border between Texas and Mexico. Through 1846 to 1848, the Mexican-American War results in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The treaty establishes the Rio Grande as the boundary between Mexico and the United States. Through 1910 to 1920, the Mexican Revolution takes place, leading to increased migration from Mexico to the United States, primarily driven by the need to escape the war and find refuge in America's economy. Soon after, the Labor Appropriation Act of 1924 established the Border Patrol as an agency of the United States Department of Labor assigned to prevent illegal entries primarily along the Mexico-United States border, as well as the Canada-U.S. border. Later, in 1954, Operation Wetback employs the U.S. military to detain and deport illegal immigrants. The policy was quietly encouraged by the Mexican government, which believed that Mexico was losing too many laborers to the United States. In 1969, the war on drugs officially begins. The the U.S. installs agents on the border to inspect all materials and people attempting to enter the country for illegal narcotics. In response to this, in 1973, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, or the DEA, is established. When the 21st century comes, the world quickly changes. In 2001, with the aftermath of September 11th attacks, the U.S. government strengthens border security measures and creates the Department of Homeland Security to bolster border and national security. Under George W. Bush in 2006, the Secure Fence Act is signed into law, authorizing the construction of physical barriers along the U.S.-Mexico border. This put hundreds of miles of fencing across the southern border and authorizes the Department of Homeland Security to increase the use of advanced technology like cameras, satellites, and unmanned aerial vehicles to reinforce our infrastructure at the border. Later in 2016, newly elected Donald Trump promises to build a border wall. This campaign heavily focused on immigration enforcement and construction of a physical barrier along the U.S.-Mexico border. Years later, in 2021, Joe Biden takes office and reverses Trump's policies. The construction of the wall has stopped. A year later, migration at the border spikes to an all-time high in May 2022, when the United States apprehends 200,000 illegal immigrants in 1 month as they try to cross the border. On October 1st, 2023, the end of September witnesses over 10,000 illegal immigrants per day crossing the border from Mexico into the U.S. These events have formed the border into what it is today. To start things off, we need to understand that to stop crime, you need law enforcement. This is not something new. People need to understand that if you want someone protected, you need a protector. If you do not have people who put order into society, the world will not function properly. Therefore, at the United States-Mexico border, we need an increase of those who will protect the people of both countries. Doing so can help decrease the number of innocent people being trafficked and or smuggled across or near the border. For example, in 2023, Texas launches Operation Lone Star. By deploying thousands of National Guard soldiers along the border, they were able to arrest over 40,000 criminal suspects, obtain more than 400 million lethal doses of fentanyl, and rescue hundreds of human trafficking victims. Protecting the border is not about turning people away, it's about turning away those who do harm. Since the beginning of the war between Russia and Ukraine, the United States government has given $183 billion to help aid Ukraine in military funds. Across the world, human trafficking generates over $245 billion every year. While the United States gives billions upon billions to war, we seem to stop when it comes to bringing peace and justice to the people in our own country. The amount the United States gives to combat human trafficking in our own country is only about $90 million, a 99.97% decrease from the total amount of money given to foreign war. The difference that the United States can make alone to stop human trafficking is a substantial amount. Organizations like Our Rescue, founded by Tim Ballard, who is well known for personally fighting against human trafficking, could be a huge help if given the right funding and recognition. If the United States government would change their priorities on what we are spending, then we could have a big impact on this issue. Setting policies to help funding go directly to those who combat human trafficking would only benefit our border strength and safety of the American and Mexican people. Because of the many ports of entry along the U.S.-Mexico border, keeping track of who crosses can be troubling for Border Patrol. As technology rapidly advances every day, we can use this to our advantage to help us with identifying individuals. To fight against the trafficking of children across the border, the Department of Homeland Security, through its Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, started using a new type of testing to ensure that families crossing the border are not what DHS calls fraudulent family units. The new test involves a DNA sample of the adult migrant who's accompanying a minor, which is then processed in 90 minutes and establishes the relationship between the two parties. Of course, concerns of the individual's consent and safety rises, and to solve this problem, they can simply refuse to take the test. However, refusing to take the test might result in being suspicious if later found in court. During a 3-day test of this method, 84 families were tested, and out of the 84, 16 of those families were deemed fraudulent. The adults face prosecution for criminal charges, including identity and benefit fraud, alien smuggling, human trafficking, and child exploitation. Finding out from a small test that 20% of those who were tested are found to be criminals could be a huge turnaround for the industry as they try to identify them to protect others. Since the issue involves our border with Mexico, some might say, the border creates segregation among different races and communities. Because our border with Mexico creates a physical separation from the American and Mexican people, you separate people from each other, which can create a culture of racism. When this happens, you people blindly judge by the color of their skin and treated wrongly for something that cannot be helped. However, what seems to be happening because of the border is just the result of human sin and hate. Our divide and hate do not come from physical boundaries, but from our own choices to look at others as less than ourselves. If you think about it, most of the world is divided by each other simply because we are separated by oceans, mountains, rivers, and simply just long distances. With America being sandwiched between Canada and Mexico with no natural separation, we are burdened with having to artificially make a border using means that may not be appealing to most people, but is still necessary to give ourselves restraint. The Catholic Church, specifically Pope Francis, has also been very open about his views on the U.S.-Mexico border. His concern on the issue characterizes the crisis as a serious problem. In a letter to the U.S. bishops, he criticized migration policies based solely on force, warning that such approaches would end badly. The Pope's want for migrants aligns with his border call for nations to open the door to migration, asserting that migration contributes positively to a country's growth. In response to this, I'd like to emphasize that the goal is not to completely close off the border, nor is it to stop immigration. The goal is to make it so we can protect those that are vulnerable to those trying to take advantage of them, whether they come from America or Mexico. If we were to ignore the migrant completely, it would be more on the side of forgetting their human dignity, knowing that they will be unaccounted for if entered unlawfully. Because America has such a large border for migrants across, it would be irresponsible to completely ignore those who want to cross. There are orderly ways of doing things, and border control is simply a way of responding to 2.5 million immigrants a year wanting to cross the U.S.-Mexico border. Vatican City itself has many rules and penalties for illegal entry. The penalty for illegal entry to include fines ranging from $10,000 to $25,000, and a prison sentence from 1 to 4 years. Anyone convicted of illegal entry will be banned from entering Vatican territory for a period of up to 15 years. So you can see, nobody wants illegal entry into their territory, not America, Mexico, or even Vatican City. Our weak strategies and poor border policies need to be changed to help combat this issue of human trafficking, to raise the issue as a hotspot for traffickers. By strengthening security, increasing funding for anti-trafficking groups, and research and use of DNA, we can take down trafficking groups and protect countless lives. We need to change our views from our border as being a political move to recognizing that the protection of those who do not protect themselves comes as first priority. The priority of the parties, whether they are Democrat or Republican, should be to protect the people of the country so they can have the freedom to pursue happiness. The idea of the border being a hardcore conservative move only started after Trump made it his front poster as he was fighting to become president. And Biden only made it worse by completely erasing every policy ever put into the border. By revising our border this way, I believe we can bring attention to, and most importantly, lower the number of people trafficked. Thank you, my nice self.
Leanne.
Great job, Paul. So for your DNA kind of situation, and correct me if I'm wrong, right now DNA testing kind of takes a while to get back results when you do it like at home and stuff like that. So what do you think, so until medicine and technology is advanced enough for DNA results to come back instantly, what do you think is another solution that can be taken at the border to make sure that that child is with the right parent?
Thank you for your question. Just to clarify, I don't know if I stated this, but the DNA testing at the border, according to the sources that I used, were only taking about 90 minutes to process. So, I mean, 90 minutes is something that like people would probably be willing to wait for across the border. Thank you for your question.
Hey, Paul, great job. I've learned a lot there. Your information was spot on. With DNA, that's a lot faster. I used to work on the border, so it's within minutes now. We're fine to get away with that, unfortunately. But yeah, that was a great way to stop a lot of the trafficking. It was like a bad episode of like Jerry Springer. But you're not the father. So once Trump, now the border is effectively shut down with Trump in there. But then, that can just flip-flop back and forth, right? So how do you foresee like a long-term strategy besides every 4 years you go back and forth, back and forth? What's a long-term strategy to combat that? And also, what do you think is the best way to combat the demand, right? So just like the drugs, there's a demand in the U.S. for these trafficking victims, right? So you're talking about enforcement works, but what can we do to help with the demand, this insatiable demand for the sex trafficking victims that we have here in the U.S.?
Thank you for your question. I think the demand, like, for people that are like being trafficked and all the evil people who are trafficking these people just needs to be stopped by more people wanting to stop these people personally. I think the more people we have to fight against these individuals, like, obviously, the more protected the other individuals will be. So, yeah.
I'm not sure if this is a problem. So basically with the DNA testing, what if a family has an adopted child? Does that just not exist? Or like, how would they be able to prove that or show that? How would it be distinguished?
Thank you for your question. Well, I didn't really look into the solution for that, but I would assume that you would have to have a lot of documents to be able to prove. And I mean, that should be obvious enough when you're crossing the border. You're already going to need a lot of documents, but especially when you have a child that's adopted, you've got to be prepared to be able to show a lot of evidence to be able to prepare that.
Well, last question, and obviously this was a tricky paper because he chose a question in the fall that was becoming, as you say, kind of the issue of the elections. We're like, oh my gosh, everything can change overnight. In fact, it kind of did. What's one thing you would change about your paper now if you wrote it today, May 20th?
Do you mean make it better?
Now that you've seen what happened the last several months of the Trump administration, what's one thing you would change about your paper, if anything?
I don't think I'd change anything. I mean, I think everything I wrote, it's valid. I think these should be, really what needs to be grounded into the border. And I think this is just something that, every time a new president is elected, whether Democrat or Republican, should use these as the pillars of the border.
Excellent. Good job, Paul.
All right, our final presenter for this evening will address the question, which is most beneficial for healing the body during the common cold, over-the-counter drugs or physical exercise? Please join me in welcoming to the podium, Selena Pearl.
We all know that annoying, uncomfortable, groggy feeling that comes with having a cold. It is a frustrating sickness because it usually takes 1 to 2 weeks to go away. And there is also no apparent cure because it is a virus that comes back in several different strains. Oftentimes we are left with the advice of wait it out and take some pills. But is this really the advice we need, or is there something else that can help to heal our body from a cold? This leads to the key question of my presentation. When comparing the effects of over-the-counter drugs for a cold and moderate exercise, which one is the most beneficial for healing your body from the cold? I argue exercise is the most beneficial. This is because over-the-counter drugs for a cold are meant for symptom relief. There are many side effects that comes with taking these over-the-counter drugs. Meanwhile, there are positive effects that exercise has on your body. In this presentation, I will be going through some background, my 3 points, an objection, reply, and conclusion. Let's consider the biochemistry of a cold. According to the CDC, quote, a cold is a viral infection of the upper respiratory tract, end quote. What happens when your body is fighting off this sickness? This information is crucial in order to determine the best way to heal the body. When a virus enters your body, it attaches to your cells and infects them. Because cells replicate quickly, this virus spreads all over your body within a matter of hours. The first step in the process of the immune response are cytokine messages. The infected cells and cytokine messages alerting other cells to fight off the virus. The process of alerting your immune system takes about 2 days. After this, your brain, your vessels, and your white blood cells are alerted to fight off the virus. In order to flood the infected areas with the white blood cells, when your blood vessels receive the message, they begin to dilate. These blood vessels fill with fluid and become puffy. This causes the inflammation in your body and the uncomfortable feeling during a cold. When the white blood cells arrive, they begin to kill the virus. Some of the white blood cells also make antibodies if the virus returns. To get rid of all the excess fluid used to attach to the virus and white blood cells used, your body begins to flush it out through your nose. This process of recognizing, fighting, flushing out, and making antibodies takes several days for your body to accomplish. Now let's define some key terms for this paper. When I use the term exercise, I mean light exercise, a jog, a light walk, or a light workout. Just enough exercise that will get your muscles moving, your blood pumping, and break a sweat is sufficient. In addition, there are certain symptoms in which you should not exercise with. Amanda McMillan says, quote, try using the head-neck rule to determine whether exercising while sick is safe, end quote. This rule says that symptoms such as a cough, sore throat, swollen lymph nodes, and congestion are all above the neck, and you can still exercise. Symptoms such as chest tightness, fever, chills are not okay to run with. As with all things, if you overdo it, the opposite effect may result, so you must be intentional with the extent that you exercise with a cold. My first point is that over-the-counter drugs do not heal you from a cold, but give you relief of symptoms. Cold medicines target certain symptoms. By targeting these symptoms, over-the-counter drugs inhibit your body and immune system from doing its job. Your immune system is an extremely important part of your body and is vital to the healing process from the cold. If you have congestion, then you take expectorants or decongestants such as nasal sprays. If you have a cough, then you take cough suppressants. If you have inflammation, then you take ibuprofen. Ibuprofen is a good example of targeting symptoms. Ibuprofen is an inhibitor of an enzyme called cyclokinase. By blocking this specific enzyme, ibuprofen lowers the number of prostaglandins made, therefore decreasing inflammation. But the inflammation, as I mentioned before, has a purpose: to flood blood vessels with white blood cells. If we cut off this enzyme that creates the inflammation during the immune response, it will slow down the healing process for your body. Another example of how cold medicines cut off the healing process is in an antihistamine. Histamine plays an important role in your body. Dr. Yang, who has a PhD in biochemistry, says histamine is, quote, a biogenic amine that acts as a neurotransmitter and plays a crucial role in immune response, digestion, and brain function, end quote. Some over-the-counter drugs are antihistamines. These chemicals in the medicine work to block histamine by essentially blocking receptors, which send signals to the rest of your body. When you have a cold, blocking histamine can slow your receptors down, taking longer for your body to be alerted and respond to the virus. My next point is on the side effects of over-the-counter drugs. For the short term, it may seem that as a result of ingesting over-the-counter drugs, your body is on the way to recovery and healing. However, when you stop taking the medicine and your cold is still there are side effects alongside the sickness itself. Because of the danger of the side effects of these medicines, taking over-the-counter drugs for short-term relief is not worth it. The chemicals put inside these drugs affect us in many ways. Expectorants attempt to thin mucus. They can cause drowsiness and an upset stomach. Decongestants are also commonly used for a cold. Ken Liska, who has a PhD in pharmaceutical chemistry, notes, quote, decongestants like nasal sprays, along with being highly addictive, cause faster heart rates, insomnia, and a rise in blood pressure, end quote. Only after a short time of use, there are cases of addiction. Addictions such as these can cause serious issues, especially when it has negative effects on the heart. Oftentimes, when one is treating symptoms of a cold, it comes with side effects, so more drugs are added to stop those effects. Liska goes on to say, quote, "In order to get one drug that might relieve symptoms, the person is forced to take many others that are not needed and that may have side effects or allergic potential," end quote. Many cold medicines such as Dayquil and Mucinex contain several drugs to target the most symptoms at a time. While these medications make you feel better, while taking them, they are also filled with chemicals that are working against your immune system. My third point emphasizes the positive effects of exercise while you're sick. One of the most amazing things about exercise that people sometimes forget is that it can act as a type of medicine on its own. George Fletch, a German science journalist, says, quote, "Many of these studies show that moderate training can be seen as a form of medicine in its own right, which can be confidently prescribed like a tried and tested drug," end quote. The way our body behaves and functions relies on exercise. Our muscles, metabolism, immune system, our blood vessels' health, glucose levels, the list goes on. Our immune system especially is affected by exercise. This is important because when you are sick, your body relies heavily on your immune system. A study published in the American Journal of Medicine found that women who engaged in walking for at least 30 minutes daily had half the number of colds compared to those who were inactive. One specific example of the immune system that is affected by exercise is the lymphatic system. A physical therapist, Sarah Cleveland, says, quote, "The lymphatic system is stimulated by moving your muscles and getting your heart rate up. The contraction of your muscles becomes the pump that helps the fluid get around your body. Exercise can help the lymphatic system flow more effectively, potentially help prevent infections and other diseases," end quote. Moderate exercise can also stimulate the immune system, which promotes the circulation of immune cells that help to fight infections. In addition to the lymphatic system, exercise can also affect your mood. Quote, "Exercise can release endorphins, helping to elevate your mood and combat feelings of fatigue or irritability associated with being unwell," end quote. Also, movement can increase blood circulation, which may clear out mucus and reduce nasal congestion. In order for your body to properly heal, you need to give it what it is made for: water, food, and exercise. Some may object to this by saying, when you have a bad cold, rest can be very beneficial because of your symptoms you are unable to rest. Would it not be better to take medicine in this case so that you can relax your body so that it can heal? According to Resto NYC, quote, "When your body is fighting off an infection like a cold, resting allows it to direct more energy towards the immune response rather than daily activities. Your body needs extra energy when it's mounting an immune defense against the cold. Exercising may cause more stress on your body, and rest calms your body down so that you can recover faster. Sleep is also essential to the body, as well as food, water, and exercise." In response to this, as I mentioned before, our bodies were meant to move. Fletch says, quote, "The flexible parts of the body, like joints, tendons, ligaments, muscles, and skin, ordinarily move often, allowing them to function properly. When the freedom of these movements is constrained, these parts shrink. This reaction can be seen within 8 hours of rest. I do not want to undermine getting rest because this is a vital part in the healing process of a cold. However, rest cannot be the only prescription. You can rest and exercise. Rest does not mean lay in bed all day. It means when you go to sleep, get a sufficient amount of sleep during the night." In conclusion, is there really no cure for the common cold, or are doctors hesitant to say it's exercise? I would argue the latter. I do think exercise is the cure for the common cold. This is because over-the-counter drugs target symptoms, they have several side effects, and because the benefits of exercise has on your body. More and more research is coming about how exercise affects us. I'm not saying that all medicines should not be taken and are dangerous. However, if there are other healthier options to heal a cold, like exercise, these should take priority. Paul says in Corinthians, quote, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God. You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore honor God with your bodies." End quote. God sacrificed himself so that we may live. He gave us a duty to care for our bodies and to keep them healthy the best way we are able. This, of course, looks different for everyone, but one thing is for sure. Everyone needs exercise and physical activity so that they can thrive and serve God in the best way they are able. Thank you, and I now stand for questions.
Max.
Hi, Selena. Great presentation. Obviously, pharmaceutical companies make a lot of money when you're sick. So, in your research, have you found evidence of companies putting potentially addictive chemicals or maybe worsening the effects so that they buy more of the product?
Thank you for your question. During my research, when I was reading one of the books about the effects of over-the-counter drugs and just other diseases too, I did find quite a bit of evidence. I could not add that into my presentation on account of the time limit. One of the main things that I found, I didn't really read anything about how they put more addictive medicine into it, but I did find that they're advertising and making things seem worse than they actually are in order to promote buying more. And there was some crazy statistics that I came across during that.
Lawrence.
Oh.
Never mind, Lawrence. Mrs. McCormick.
Hi, Selena. Great job. Okay, so my question deals with children who are sick. Because you're facing like a toddler with a fever who's really uncomfortable, and you know that if they went outside and played, that might help them feel better sooner. But they are so very uncomfortable. Do you give them the medicine anyways?
Thank you for your question. As I mentioned in my paper, there are certain symptoms, like the head-neck rule. With a fever, it's like you should not exercise, and therefore I do think taking medicine would be, ideally, if the symptoms aren't as bad, you could exercise, but if it's a fever, it's generally more harmful to go exercise, and as a mom with like other kids and like other things to do, yeah, I think it would be okay to give them medicine.
Ms. McGowan.
That was excellent, Selena. And I really appreciate you highlighting the importance of, physical activity and the lymph flow. That was excellent. And just in your research and your beginning phases of developing your question, did you ever come across other alternatives such as homeopathy or vitamins, natural remedies, etc.?
Yes, thank you for your question. That is also one of the things that I wanted to add into my paper, but it just got too complicated. But I did, essential oils, vitamin C, tea, different herbs. I did come across that. And I think that if you can avoid taking medicine and you can take those other homeopathic medicines, that also basil really, taking basil tea also gets rid of inflammation in a more natural way than medicines do, and rather than just cutting off the enzyme and just taking everything away and actually inhibiting the immune system, it actually enhances it. So yeah, I did come across those, and if you are able to take those rather than taking medicine, I do think you should. Thank you.
Great job, Selena.
All right, congratulations to all our presenters. Great job. Let's go ahead and close with prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Have a blessed night. God bless you.